The first objective we're going to cover today is creating a project in Android Studio. We'll go over what Android Studio is, what type of program it is, and how we create projects in it. So Android Studio is a type of program called a IDE. IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. This consists of multiple components, a general IDE. It consists of a code editor, where you write the code, build automation tools that take the code that you write and compile it down to something that your hardware device can understand, and then a debugger allows you to run and test your code. And there are additional quality of life features like IntelliSense, which kind of tries to figure out what you're writing in your code and prompt you and suggest things to do, which is really helpful for completing verbose tasks that require a lot of characters and a lot of code to write. Android Studio is provided for free by Google. It's built on the platform of another IDE called IntelliJ, which is developed by JetBrains. JetBrains is an awesome company. They have a lot of really good IDEs for developing in different languages. I really like using WebStorm for web development. You'll be writing Python later on in the full course, and PyCharm is amazing for that too, and there are just a bunch of different IDEs that they have. Android Studio has additional features beyond a standard IDE. One of those is downloading and managing Android libraries. Libraries are chunks of code that have been bundled to move from project to project. So somebody can write a library to create a color picker, for example, is one that I've worked with. And you just import that library into your code and then call a few methods on it, and it will work just fine. You get full functionality with just a little bit of things to add. It also lets you create and run Android virtual devices. So Android virtual devices are what's known as an emulator. So what it does is it will emulate or simulate the hardware that Android is used to running on. And so you'll have an instance of Android running on your desktop computer. And anyone knows anything about hardware knows that CPU for a desktop or processor for a desktop is completely different from a processor for a mobile phone. So what Android Studio does is it will translate the commands from the mobile phone into commands on the CPU and vice versa. So this instance of Android thinks it's running on a Pixel 2 or whatever else that it could be running on. So what are some other IDEs that you've heard of or used? Think about those and write them down if you have something there. There are some notable ones. For iOS development on iPhones and iPads, there's one called Xcode, which is provided by Apple. However, it's only available on Mac OS, so you have to have a MacBook or a computer running Mac OS to be able to use Xcode. There's also Visual Studio, which is made by Microsoft, and it's used for C++ and C# development, so different languages. Then you also have Eclipse and, of course, IntelliJ that work with Java and Kotlin and additional languages like that. Some developers prefer to develop without the use of an IDE. So they use programs like Notepad++, Sublime, and Vim. These provide a very basic code editor with basic syntax highlighting. You'll notice as we write code, some words will change colors as we write them, and that categorizes, or they change color based on the category that they're in. So if it's a variable name, it'll be a certain color. If it's a library name, it'll be a certain color, and it'll help you organize your code visually. So tools like Notepad++, Sublime, and Vim will have that, but they don't include build automation tools or a debugger or any of the big things. So some people do prefer to use that. However, due to the complexity of mobile platforms, IDEs like Android Studio and Xcode are all but required for development. I have talked to some developers that have tried to write for Android on Vim or Notepad++, so without a full IDE, and it's just too much work and it's not worth it. So let's get into Android Studio and creating a project. So when you launch Android Studio, you'll get a window that will ask you if you want to open an existing project or create a new one. So you'll likely not have any existing projects to open, so you can just click to create a new project. When you create a project, you'll be able to select the type of activity that you want. Then you'll give your project a name and then tell it which type of Android devices to target. So what I want you to do is I want you to launch Android Studio. You can go ahead and pause this video and wait until it launches, and you should get a window just like this. You can see I have a bunch of projects over here, but go ahead and pause the video until you get this window. Okay, now that you have this window, this is what we're looking right here. We're looking for starting a new Android Studio project. You can see the version I'm using is version 3.4. This was released spring 2019. So your version may look slightly different. If there are any significant changes, we'll create an update for this. You can see here, start a new Android Studio project is what we're looking for. So you go ahead and click start. And remember, I want you following along with me at this point. This is our we do portion where we do something together. So we can see here, here's a list of different activities. An activity is just a page or a screen in your app. So you can see Android Studio provides us a few templates. If we want to have a Google Maps activity, which we'll be working with later, a master detail flow, a navigation drawer activity, a full screen activity. There's a lot of different types of activities that you can use. The vast majority of the time, you'll just start with an empty activity. But if you're interested in learning, diving in and saying, hey, look, I want to see how a navigation drawer works, which we do cover in the full course, but you can dive into that and see their code and how Google recommends you do that. So once we select that, we're good to go. You can see there are other platforms up here. So if I wanted to create an activity for Wear OS, so Android Wear, Android Auto, or sorry, Android TV, Android Auto, Android Things, whatever else we want, we can do that. But we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to select an empty activity. Go ahead and click Next. Now we need to give our application a name. So we're going to give it the name of Intro to Android We Do Demo. You don't want to have any... You can notice actually it removes spaces from here, and that's fine. This is a relatively long name, but it works for our purposes. We want to make sure we're selecting the language Kotlin. If you click this drop down, you can see you can select Java. These are two different programming languages that you can write Android apps in. Java's been around for decades. It is a staple in coding and one of the most popular coding languages. However, recently, in the last few years, Google's been pushing heavily towards the use of Kotlin, and for Android development, Kotlin is the way to go. But you can develop in either language, and actually a lot of apps can be written in both languages. You'll have one file in Java, one file in Kotlin, and the way these languages are built, they work very well together like that. The next one is your API level. So if you click this, you can see different versions of Android. So what this does is I say, I want somebody to have at least Android 5 to run my app. What this does is if we click this link here, we can see a list here. And on the side, you can see features. These are features that are added in this version of Android. So you can see if we go, let's just look at, so if you select ice cream sandwich, you'll have face detection. If you select lollipop, you'll have the face detection, all the things in all of these, plus these additional features. So these are new features for this version. So one of the ones that's very common and very important here is material design support. Material design is the design language for Android. It's kind of the foundation of how they want you to design user interfaces in Android. You'll also see this list here. This is called cumulative distribution. So this says if I select lollipop, 85% of all Android devices in the world will be able to run my app. And these are active Android devices, whatever Google considers to be active. So you know that there are a lot of Android devices that were released years ago that never got these updates. Those aren't considered unless they're being actively used. So if we were to select Jelly Bean or Ice Cream Sandwich, we could have a higher percentage of install base. People could potentially install our app in bigger, more people could. You can see Oreo is a 1.1. If I use the latest version of Oreo, only 1% of devices will be able to run that. So we don't necessarily want to pick that. Unless there's something here we absolutely need to have, we want to go relatively low. I like to target Lollipop because it has the material design support. 85% of devices is good enough for me. But this is up to your development team, wherever you work, to decide which version that they want to target. A lot of simple apps don't need some of these features, and you could easily just grab something lower. So we'll just go with Android 5 right now, Lollipop. So I've selected that. Our app will run on 85% of devices. And then there we go, we're good to go. Now I can go ahead and click Finish. And then Android Studio is going to take my selections and it's going to build what's known as a Hello World app. So a Hello World app is, or Hello World in general, is just kind of like a tradition in software development. When you're building something for a new platform or learning a new language, generally you create this app called Hello World. And all it does is it shows on the screen the words Hello World. And the idea is that you create the entire platform, you get your development tools set up, you get your code set up in a very basic way, and you test it. And the way you test it is just saying, Hello World. It's kind of like, hey, I'm new to Android development. Hello. So we can look really quick and see what a Hello World app in Android consists of. So you can see the most important files here are going to be your main activity. So this is a mainactivity.kt. So this is code written in Kotlin. And then you also will have a layout file. So this is a layout file. And this is in the language XML that we mentioned in our objectives. So you can see here we have Hello World here. Just resize it a little bit so you can see that. So we have a text view and Hello World. And as you can see, there are a lot of files and directories generated. So anything that doesn't have an arrow next to it is a file. Anything that does have the arrow next to it is going to be a directory. So you can see there's a lot of stuff that's generated for us. This can look very, very overwhelming. Don't worry about any of that. We'll dive into some of these as we go through. For now, you only care about mainactivity.kt and activitymain.xml. And we'll dive into what each of these things do as we go through today and throughout the rest of the pre-course and full course. So the challenge for this objective is I want you to look at the files generated by our new project. So go through here, look at the files, kind of get a feel for what they are. Look at files that have these different symbols. The symbols next to here tell the type. So anything that has this orange is going to be an XML. You can see these are images. You can see this is a Kotlin file. Don't change anything. Just look at it and get a feel for it. Just spend a couple minutes on that. And then I'll meet you back at our next objective.